Welcome to Tales of Fae and Folk, and in this very first episode of this very new series, we are going to be taking a look at some of the iconic and delightfully whimsical fairy artists, those artists that have been with us from childhood through to our older age and delight us still. In this very first episode, we are going to be taking a look at the life and the delightful flower fairy artwork of Amelia Jane Murray. The world of fairy art is one of those genres well represented by women. In the Victorian era, when painting was considered a task fit for ladies to enjoy, it was one of those areas where well-bred ladies could express themselves as much as possible. We find beautiful botanical studies by a great many female artists, landscapes aplenty, and in the realm of the fairy artists, a whole plethora of incredibly talented and imaginative women. One of these artists, and one whose work was brought together in a book collected by all lovers of the genre, as her delicate depictions of the fairies has a uniquely historical style, is Amelia Jane Murray, Emily to her family. Amelia Jane Murray lived from 1800 to 1896, was also known as Lady Oswald. Born on the very fairy folklore-filled Isle of Man that sits between the shores of England and Ireland, her childhood would have been filled with the stories of the little folk, the good folk, and she would have been surrounded by beautiful wild nature. As a female artist of this time, of course, her works are also filled with precise botanical subjects, flowers and leaves providing a delicate foil and stage for the fairies she has placed among them. Truly the first flower fairy artist, her art predating the fairy craze of a later Victorian era. The home of her birth and place of her youth was Portachee area of Douglas on the island, one of the name roots of the place being the Fort of the Fairies, so it's no wonder that Amelia Murray felt a closeness to these small beings. She was from a very distinguished family line, niece of the Duke of Atholl, who was governor of the Isle of Man. Her mother was Elizabeth Kent, of an old prestigious Lancashire family. When she was only 5 years old, her father, Lord Henry Murray, passed away, and so she and her 5 brothers and sisters were cared for first at the elegant Mount Murray, and later in her life at the governor's residence of Castle Mona. Here the family enjoyed all the trappings of a privileged social life, attending many grand balls, social gatherings at the assembly rooms, and visiting the capital of the island, Douglas, which was becoming increasingly fashionable in the era. As with all Regency young ladies, she was taught drawing and watercolour painting and became a very accomplished artist. She took the folklore and fairy lore of the island as inspiration for her art, fusing their narratives with the plant life and animal life she became familiar with in the countryside where she lived. Her depictions of the flora and fauna are keen studies, beautifully rendered in watercolour. The fairies are pretty, delicate things, elegant and dressed in Regency and early Victorian costume, diaphanous, often quite languid, but always ethereal and utterly romantic. The works were personal studies, a family book of beautiful images, watercolour on pasteboard, presented with beautifully created embossed handmade borders in the new style of gouffrage. The great majority of her paintings dates to the 1820s, when she would have been a very young woman, before marriage and the responsibilities of family life took over her concern. In 1929, she married General Sir John Oswald of Dunaker, a much older man at 58 years old, a widower with 6 children from his former wife. Amelia was the cousin of his former wife, and she was considered rather old in life as to the standards of the day to be starting a married life. The couple moved to his family estate in Fife in Scotland, where Amelia and her husband had 2 more children to add to their huge family. It was now that real life intervened. The fairies were left behind, the paintings were left behind, a hidden memorial to her youth, and sadly she created very little art during the rest of her life. In 1985, Murray's works were rediscovered and brought to the wider public thanks to the current owner of the paintings, April Agnew Somerville, in the beautifully presented book, A Regency Lady's Fairy Bower, a private view of fairyland. This stunning book showed images of the paintings along with the embossed borders she created as part of the artwork. Although originally there were no poems with Amelia's paintings, the book does have a lovely selection of poetry complementary to the images, along with snippets of text. The book is still readily available today and makes a great addition to any collection of fairy art or folklore books. Although Amelia predated the Victorian fairy painting era by quite some years, she is widely regarded today as one of the first of the genre and a well-respected artist of the fairy art world. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Artists of the Fairy Realm. What a wonderful artist Amelia was. I can't imagine her life growing up in the Isle of Man, so full of beautiful nature and so many fairies and so much folklore. No wonder she was inspired to create such beautiful work. So delicate as well, so Jane Austen and just pretty. Anyway, I hope you like this episode and I hope you love her work too. So, until next time, dear friends, take care, brightest of blessings, and remember, don't play with the fairy folk, or you may end up in one of my folk tales or one of Mark's paintings yourself.